if you have to go take it down there and drop it off and unstick it under the door or something, get that tithe in that church, you get that offering in that church, and then you go home. I execute judgment on you, Satan, you destroyer, you killer, you get out, you break your...
For more than 50 years, Kenneth Copeland stood at the center of one of the largest ministries in the world. He survived criticism over prosperity teaching, questions about wealth, debates over private jets, viral interviews, and failed prophecy accusations that many believed would end his influence. Yet none of those moments brought his ministry to a halt. So why are more people asking today whether his influence is changing? To answer that, we traced the evidence from the very beginning, separating verified facts from internet rumors and uncovering a story that is far more complicated than the headlines suggest. Long before Kenneth Copeland became one of the most recognized televangelists in the world, he was chasing a very different dream. Born in Lubbock, Texas in 1936, he spent part of his early adult life focused on music. He even recorded songs and briefly worked in the entertainment world. At the time, few could have guessed that his future would be shaped not by a stage, but by a pulpit. Everything began to change after what Copeland has described as a personal spiritual turning point. His growing interest in the Bible eventually led him to study under evangelist Oral Roberts, one of the most influential Christian ministers of his generation. Working closely with Roberts gave Copeland a front-row seat to the world of large-scale evangelism, faith healing, and nationwide ministry. It also showed him how television could carry a message far beyond the walls of a church. In the late 1960s, Kenneth Copeland launched what would become Kenneth Copeland Ministries. What started as a small outreach steadily grew into an international organization with television broadcasts, books, conferences, Bible schools, and offices serving audiences in many countries. Alongside his wife, Gloria Copeland, he built a ministry centered on one core message, that faith in God could transform every area of a person's life, including health, finances, and daily living. For many believers, that message brought hope during difficult times, but for others, it raised difficult questions. As the ministry expanded and donations increased, critics began asking whether the promises being preached matched what the Bible actually teaches. Those questions would eventually grow into one of the biggest debates in modern Christianity, and they were only the beginning. By the 1980s and 1990s, Kenneth Copeland's ministry had grown far beyond what most people thought possible. His television program reached viewers across the United States and around the world. Conferences attracted thousands. Books sold in large numbers. Through Kenneth Copeland Ministries, his message spread into dozens of countries, and a loyal audience continued to grow year after year. At the center of that growth was a teaching that became both his greatest strength and his biggest source of controversy. Often called the prosperity gospel or word of faith teaching, it emphasized that faith is more than belief. It is something believers should speak, act on, and expect to produce results. Copeland taught that God desires his people to experience blessing, healing, and provision, and that generous giving is part of biblical obedience and trust in God's promises. To supporters, this message was deeply encouraging. Many shared personal testimonies of lives changed, financial breakthroughs, restored health, or renewed hope after applying these teachings. They saw Copeland as someone who challenged Christians to believe God for more, rather than settle for fear or defeat. But not everyone agreed. Many pastors and theologians argued that these teachings placed too much emphasis on material success and could leave people feeling responsible when healing or financial improvement did not come. Others questioned whether verses about faith and blessing were being interpreted in their proper context. As the debate spread across churches, seminaries, and Christian media, Kenneth Copeland became one of the most recognizable and most polarizing figures in modern Christianity. Yet, while the theological debate grew louder, another conversation was beginning to emerge. This one wasn't about sermons or Bible verses. It was about wealth, luxury, and a lifestyle that would soon capture the attention of the entire world. For years, Kenneth Copeland's teachings drew most attention, but eventually the conversation shifted away from the pulpit and towards something far more visible, his lifestyle. As his ministry expanded, reports about luxury homes, expensive aircraft, and high-end travel became regular topics of discussion. To supporters, these were simply tools that allowed a global ministry to operate efficiently. To critics, they became symbols of everything they believed was wrong with prosperity preaching. No issue attracted more attention than the ministry's use of private jets. Copeland argued that flying privately allowed him to reach more ministry events, protect his schedule, and avoid the challenges that came with commercial travel. He maintained that these aircraft were practical tools for a worldwide ministry, not displays of personal luxury. Then came the interview that would spread far beyond Christian audiences. In 2019, an Inside Edition reporter asked Copeland why he continued to fly on private aircraft instead of commercial airlines. During the conversation, he defended his position and referred to commercial air travel as getting into a long tube with a bunch of demons. The phrase quickly spread across television, news websites, and social media. For many viewers, it became the single moment they associated with Kenneth Copeland, regardless of everything else he had preached over the previous 5 decades. Supporters argued that his comments had been taken out of context and misunderstood. Critics saw the interview very differently, describing it as an example of how disconnected some televangelists had become from everyday people. Overnight, the debate reached millions who had never watched one of Copeland's sermons. But while the interview dominated headlines, an even bigger question was quietly forming behind the scenes. People were no longer asking only how Kenneth Copeland traveled. They were beginning to ask how ministries like his handled money in the first place. As questions about Kenneth Copeland's lifestyle grew, attention soon turned to an even bigger issue: money. Like many large ministries in the United States, Kenneth Copeland Ministries receives donations from supporters who believe in its mission. Those donations help fund television broadcasts, international outreach, conferences, disaster relief efforts, and the day-to-day work of the ministry. But they have also fueled a long-running debate about financial transparency. One reason the discussion became so heated is that churches in the United States are generally not required to publicly file the same annual financial reports that many other nonprofit organizations must submit. That means outside observers often have limited access to detailed information about church finances. Critics argue that this makes it harder for donors to understand exactly how funds are used. Supporters respond that the ministry follows the law and should not be held to standards that Congress has chosen not to require for churches. The debate reached Washington in 2007 when U.S. Senator Chuck Grassley launched an inquiry into the finances of several high-profile televangelist ministries, including Kenneth Copeland Ministries. The inquiry asked questions about compensation, housing, luxury assets, and ministry spending. It attracted national attention and intensified public scrutiny of televangelism as a whole. The inquiry did not result in criminal charges against Kenneth Copeland or his ministry. Even so, the investigation left a lasting mark on public perception. For critics, it reinforced concerns about accountability. For supporters, it was viewed as proof that years of investigation had failed to uncover criminal wrongdoing. But before that debate could settle, something else happened. The rise of social media changed the rules completely. Old interviews, old sermons, and old controversies suddenly found a new audience, one far larger than anyone had imagined. For decades, Kenneth Copeland's public image was mainly shaped by Christian television, conferences, books, and the people who already followed his ministry. If someone wanted to understand his message, they usually watched an entire sermon or attended a meeting, but the internet changed that almost overnight. As YouTube, Facebook, X, TikTok, and other platforms grew, short video clips began reaching millions of people who had never heard one of Copeland's full messages. Instead of watching an hour-long teaching, viewers were seeing only a few seconds, often the most dramatic or controversial moments. Those clips spread faster than any television broadcast ever could. The 2019 Inside Edition interview became one of those defining moments. So did clips from his COVID-19 sermons. Reaction channels, podcasts, comedians, and commentators replayed them again and again. Memes appeared across social media, turning serious debates into viral entertainment. Whether people agreed with him or not, his name was suddenly reaching audiences far beyond the Christian world. Supporters argued that these short clips stripped away context and reduced years of teaching to a handful of viral moments. They pointed out that a few seconds of video could never explain decades of ministry or the beliefs behind his statements. Critics answered that the clips showed exactly what concerned them and made those concerns visible to millions of new viewers. One thing, however, became difficult to deny. Public perception was changing. The conversation was no longer controlled by television networks or church audiences. It was being shaped by millions of people online, each sharing their own interpretation of what they had seen. And then in 2020, the world came to a standstill. A global crisis would place every church, every ministry, and every religious leader under a level of public attention few had ever experienced before. When the COVID-19 pandemic spread across the world in 2020, churches faced questions they had never faced before. Buildings closed, conferences were canceled, millions of people were frightened and looking for answers. Like many well-known religious leaders, Kenneth Copeland spoke directly to his audience about the crisis. But some of his statements quickly became the center of a global debate. During one widely shared broadcast, Copeland declared that the virus had been defeated through prayer and symbolically blew towards the camera while praying against COVID-19. The clip spread rapidly across television, news reports, and social media. For supporters, it was an expression of faith and a public prayer during a time of fear. For critics, it became one of the most controversial moments of his ministry, arguing that such declarations did not match what was happening around the world as infections continued to rise. The discussion did not stop there. Some questioned whether faith leaders should make public declarations about the course of a global health crisis. Others defended Copeland, saying his message was never meant to replace medical care, but to encourage believers to trust God in difficult times. The debate reflected a larger question many churches were wrestling with. How should faith and public health be understood together during an unprecedented pandemic? Whether people agreed with him or not, one fact was clear. The pandemic placed Kenneth Copeland under a level of public attention unlike anything he had experienced before. His sermons were no longer reaching only church audiences. They were being watched, analyzed, and debated by people around the world. Yet, even as the COVID controversy began to fade from the headlines, another issue would soon reignite questions about his public ministry. This time, the focus shifted from a global pandemic to one of the most closely watched elections in American history. If the pandemic placed Kenneth Copeland under intense public attention, the next chapter would test something even more personal: his reputation as a prophetic voice. For many years, Copeland had spoken about believing God for the future and had shared public prophetic messages during ministry events and annual broadcasts. His supporters viewed these messages as expressions of spiritual guidance and encouragement. His critics, however, watched them closely, especially when they included specific expectations about national events. The 2020 U.S. presidential election became one of the most debated examples. Before the election results were finalized, Kenneth Copeland publicly expressed confidence that Donald Trump would remain president. After the certified election outcome showed that Trump had lost, critics argued that this prediction had failed and questioned whether Copeland's prophetic claims could still be trusted. Supporters responded differently. Some believed the statements had been misunderstood or taken out of their intended context. Others argued that biblical prophecy can be conditional, symbolic, or dependent on factors that are not always immediately understood. To them, the controversy reflected deeper disagreements about how prophecy should be interpreted rather than proving deception. The debate spread far beyond church circles. Christian leaders, theologians, news organizations, and online commentators all weighed in. For some, it became evidence that modern prophetic ministries needed greater accountability. For others, it highlighted how quickly complex spiritual claims could be judged through short headlines and social media clips. Whether one agreed with Copeland or not, the controversy added another layer to a public image that had already been shaped by decades of debate. But by this point, an even greater challenge was beginning to emerge, one that no amount of media attention, criticism, or support could stop. It was the challenge that eventually comes for every leader: time itself. Born in 1936, Copeland is now one of the oldest active leaders in modern televangelism. While he still appears at selected ministry events, many longtime followers have noticed that family members and senior ministers now take a more visible role. His wife, Gloria Copeland, has gradually stepped back from regular public teaching, while children and other trusted leaders have become increasingly involved in carrying the ministry forward. In late 2024, Copeland revealed that he had been hospitalized after suffering a ruptured appendix and underwent emergency surgery. He later told supporters that he had recovered and thanked them for their prayers. The announcement reminded many viewers that even the most influential ministry leaders are not untouched by age or unexpected health challenges. Those developments have naturally led to questions about the future. Who will lead Kenneth Copeland Ministries in the years ahead? Can a ministry built around one well-known personality successfully transition to a new generation? The organization has continued to emphasize that its mission extends beyond any single individual, but succession remains one of the biggest questions surrounding its future. Perhaps this is why conversations about Kenneth Copeland have changed. They are no longer focused only on controversy. Increasingly, they are about legacy. After half a century in ministry, how will history remember him? And could the answer be more complicated than either his strongest supporters or his harshest critics expect? After tracing Kenneth Copeland's journey from a young musician to one of the most influential televangelists in the world, one question remains. Did we actually witness the fall of Kenneth Copeland, or did we witness something else entirely? The evidence tells a more complex story than many headlines suggest. It is true that his ministry has faced decades of criticism over prosperity teaching, private jets, financial transparency, public declarations during the COVID-19 pandemic, and prophetic statements that many critics believe did not come to pass as expected. Those controversies are well documented, and they have shaped how many people see him today. But it is also true that many of the most dramatic stories shared online have not been supported by credible evidence. Claims that Kenneth Copeland was arrested by the FBI, sentenced to prison, or secretly forced out of ministry continue to circulate on social media, yet none of those claims have been verified. At the same time, his supporters point to decades of ministry work, humanitarian outreach, Bible teaching, and lives they believe have been transformed through his message. That contrast explains why opinions about Kenneth Copeland remain so deeply divided. Perhaps the biggest change has not been Kenneth Copeland himself. Perhaps it's been the world around him. A generation raised on television has been replaced by one shaped by viral clips, instant reactions, and social media debates. And not environment. Every sermon, every interview, and every controversial moment can reach millions within hours. So was this the fall of Kenneth Copeland? Or are we watching the final chapter of one of the most influential and most debated ministries in modern Christian history unfold in real time? Because if history has taught us anything, it's that a person's legacy is rarely decided while their story is still being written.